Everyone, you want to sit down? How's everyone doing? Whoop, whoop. Guys, that was great. I was impressed with the energy levels there. That was fantastic, guys. It's great to be with you again this morning. And what I'm doing, for those of you who weren't here yesterday morning, and for all the yellow t-shirt people who we know won't remember anything because they don't have brains, as we troublingly discovered yesterday, is I'm using my time over these 4 mornings to ask you 4 questions. And what I need is for you guys to be able to shout back to me what the question was that we asked yesterday. Okay, after 3. 1, 2, 3. How did we get here? That's very good. And do you remember the noise that you have to make after every time I say the question for the day? Well, how does it go? Okay, it's a Scooby-Doo noise of surprise. And the thing I wanted to do yesterday was to get you to ask the question how we got here, how the universe came about. And we saw that actually there's only 3 explanations. And the best one, to my mind, is that there is a creator God. And so we're going to put that video up on YouTube. I guess a lot of you saw it and thought, hey, I didn't see all of it, or I won't remember all of that. So we're going to put it up on YouTube. It's going to be How Did We Get Here, Newday, and probably be on the Newday YouTube site as well. So you'll be able to use that after the week's over. And what I'm going to do today is ask a second question. And obviously you guys all know what noise you're going to need to make in just a couple of seconds. But this second question is an important one because yesterday we got as far as seeing the likelihood of there being a God. But what some of you probably realize is that there's no reason whatsoever from just what we did yesterday to see that God as being the Christian God. How many know that a lot of people in the world believe in God and aren't Christians? You met people like that, right? There's about 5 billion people in the world who believe in God and aren't Christians. They believe in some kind of God. Maybe loads of gods like Hindus, or maybe just one God like Muslims, or maybe a God who doesn't really interact with the world. A lot of people believe that too, but a lot of people you know believe in a God or gods, but they don't know anything about the Christian God. And so we need to ask a second question to find out what God is like. First question was, how did we get here? Second question is, and cue up the Scooby-Doo noise, who was Jesus? That was very good. You get him so much better. Who was Jesus? That's the important question to ask, because if all you are prepared to say is, yeah, I believe there was a God who made the world. I can see from the evidence and from science that's a very good explanation of the world, but I don't know anything about him. I don't know what he's like. Has he revealed himself? What am I supposed to do with that? And then we need to ask a second question, and I want to ask you a second question. Who do you think Jesus was? Who was Jesus? Great. It's very, very important that we learn to ask that question. And I don't know, this is where I'll start, right? So Jesus of Nazareth obviously existed. He is a historical figure. There's far more evidence that Jesus existed than that Julius Caesar existed. The only people who deny that Jesus existed are white guys with facial hair and high-speed internet connections. You know those guys? They just blog, they write on the internet, and they spend their lives posting on the internet, and they also believe that the government is conceding evidence of alien life forms. You come across, like, weird people deny that Jesus existed, but everybody who's read the evidence knows he existed, and that would be true of all kind of academics, of all disciplines, with 1 or 2 extremely weird exceptions. Jesus is a historical figure. He actually lived. Everybody knows that. One way you can tell that is when you write the dates, you're acknowledging that Jesus of Nazareth existed at a particular point in history. What year is it this year? 2009. 2009 years since what? Since Jesus was reckoned to have been born. Actually, he probably wasn't born in naught, but that's a different story. But we acknowledge the significance of this man because our whole dating system is based around him. He was a historical figure. He was real. And he almost certainly died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate on Friday the 7th of April, AD 30. That's very likely that was the date. We know he died by crucifixion. We know it was under the rule of a guy called Pontius Pilate, and we are pretty confident that he died on Friday the 7th of April. Anybody here's birthday the 7th of April? Okay, that's a good birthday to have. You remember now, okay? Now you're always going to remember when Jesus died. Okay, so that was very likely. That's when he did. And as I say, the only people who deny that he lived and was crucified under Pontius Pilate are people who deny all kinds of other weird and wonderful things as well, which we don't believe, so we won't spend any time on it. But not only that, there's a lot of evidence that Jesus said some extraordinary things. He said some things that you wouldn't say if you were you or me. They're things that you would only say if they were either true or if you were bizarre, as we'll see in a minute. He said some very strange things. If you have the time, then you can learn New Testament Greek, as many of you, I'm sure, are all doing that in your spare time. And you can get on a train and go to London and go to the British Museum and you can read them in display cases. Or you can go to Dublin and you can go and read some more of them in display cases. You'll see the documents, the evidence in front of you. I've been there. I've done it. I'm boring, right? I'm a geek and I read New Testament Greek. So I go and I sit in libraries and I look at just documents from 100 years after Jesus was alive, 1900 years old, and I read statements by Jesus saying, before Abraham was, I am. Or, I am the bread that came down from heaven. Or, I'm the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Or, the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And I read statements like that, and you can do the same if you want to be a geek. And you can go to London or anywhere else, and you can see these things written down, and you think, what kind of a man would say those things? We have to take this man seriously because he's pretty significant. Most people in the world would admit Jesus, important guy, right? Splits history in half, AD and BC. We know he's important. We know he existed. We know he died by crucifixion. And we know he said some incredibly odd things. So we need to ask the question, who was Jesus? We need to try and wrestle with that question and work out who we think he was. Because if somebody walked into my local shopping center and said, hey everybody, I'm the bread that came down from heaven, what do you think would happen to him? You'd get eaten. Interesting. I don't know where you come from, but make a mental note, never visit that person's town, because in there you get eaten if you claim you're God. But he said, before Abraham was, I am. You'd throw things at him, wouldn't you? Or at the least you'd laugh at him. If he said, I am the Son of Man, and I have authority on earth to forgive sins, you'd think this guy's a loony, wouldn't you? Is that what you'd think? Jesus said loads of things like that. We've got overwhelming historical evidence that he said things like that. And so we need to try and work out, this guy's obviously important. He obviously died by crucifixion. We know he existed and we know he said these things. What is going on here? Who was Jesus? Brilliant. So that's why I want to ask you the question. It's very important. Now, there are only really three options. And you have to hang with me for a second here. I'll give you examples of each. There's only three options for somebody who says the things that Jesus said. The first option is that they're loony, like I just said. If that's what I would think. In this young man's town, you eat people like that, and they don't do it in my town. They ignore them. But he's either a loony, or he's a villain, and he's trying to convince everybody that he's God for some kind of weird reason that we don't know, or he's telling the truth. And we have to ask that question. You need to ask your school friends that question. And not in an aggressive way, who was Jesus? Just need to say, hey, can you tell me, who do you think Jesus was? What would you make of him as a person? What's your explanation for the fact that this man lived, died, and said such extraordinary things? So in order to illustrate those three options, them being a loony, him being a villain, or him being God, I want to tell you some stories about four people who have claimed to be divine. Okay? Some of these I think are quite amusing. I want to tell you about a man called David Icke, whose picture is going to appear up on these screens as if by magic right now. Okay, can you see him? Okay, that's a classic 80s hairdo. So David Icke, anybody here ever seen the picture of that man before? Okay, all the yellow t-shirts, nobody else. Okay, David Icke was a BBC sports presenter in the 1980s. Do you guys know who John Inverdale is? Or Adrian Chiles? Yeah? Okay, David Icke was the equivalent of them in the 1980s. He used to present a show called Grandstand, which some of you might have seen before it's shut. He was a big deal. He was a major sports presenter. Everybody knew his face in Britain. And then on the 29th of April, 1991, he was being interviewed by Terry Wogan. You know who Terry Wogan is? Yeah, Radio 2. Well, he used to have a chat show. And he was being interviewed by Terry Wogan, and he said that he was the Son of God on Terry Wogan's show on the BBC. That was in 1991. So at that point, you have a number of explanations. You say, okay, David Icke is either losing his marbles, or he's trying to lure people into some conspiracy because he's a villain, or he's telling the truth. I don't know which one you think David Icke was, right? He was a major figure, so a lot of people knew he was. David Icke, since that day, has argued that the world is controlled by a network of secret societies, at the top of which are extraterrestrial prison wardens. That should have been extraterrestrial, I messed it up, sorry. Prison wardens, people from another planet. And he's actually more specific than that. He said, no, the world's controlled by extraterrestrial life forms. They are actually reptilians, in other words, like snakes, from the constellation Draco. Okay? Now, you guys have only heard the word Draco because it's Malfoy's first name. But that's where David Icke thinks that Barack Obama and other people who rule the world actually come from. Do you think this guy's loony or a villain or actually God? You think he's probably loony? Okay, it went further than that. In 2001, he published a book called, I just love this, if you see it in the library, don't get it out, but it's amusing. His book in 2001 was called Children of the Matrix, How an Interdimensional Race Has Controlled the World for Thousands of Years and Still Does. That's his book, 2001. David Icke is a nutter. He's lost his marbles. I'm happy to go public on that on the internet and in front of 2,000 of you. The man's a loony. He's lost his marbles. Nobody takes him seriously. He said he was the son of God, and he's now come to this position of believing the world's controlled by reptile-like leaders. He's an oddball. He's lost. The wheels have come off his wagon. He's a couple of pork pies short of a picnic. The lift doesn't go to the top floor. Whatever you want to say, he's an oddball. If you say you're the son of God, that's probably a pretty likely explanation of what's happened. You've just got deluded. Now, that's one story. Second story, a bit more tragic, so you need to be a bit more serious. In the early 1990s, there was a religious cult leader called David Koresh, and his picture's going to appear up on the screen as well. This is on the front cover of Time magazine, which is a huge publication in America. And David Koresh was a religious cult leader, and he began teaching, like David Icke, he began teaching that he was the Christ, the Son of God, and the Lamb who could open the 7 seals. That's what he said he was. And he said, he was entitled to 140 wives. Okay, so what I need is all the women in the room, as far back as the gyroscope, to stand up. Okay, all the girls in the room. Okay, now David Koresh said that he was entitled to all of you as wives. Okay? And he was more specific than that. He said 60 queens and 80 concubines. You can all sit down now. He said, I'm allowed 140 wives. I think I'm the son of God. I'm allowed 140 different wives. 60 of them are queens and 80 of them are concubines. And he began marrying teenage girls. He began marrying girls the age of some of you. This guy was wrong in the head. At the end of it all, in 1993, his compound in Texas, in America, was besieged by the FBI. There was a massive shootout. It lasted 50-odd days, and it ended up with the deaths of 76 people, 17 of whom were children. Because this guy thought he was the son of God, and he was a loony, and he was a villain as well. He used the claim, I am the son of God, to trick and manipulate dozens of people, and 76 of them got killed. He was a troubled man. He was a bad man, and he was a madman as well. But that's another story of somebody who believed they were the son of God. Finally, a third story. Somebody else who thought they were God. I don't know how many, you probably won't have. But the movie 300, this is an excerpt from that movie, and it's a conversation between Leonidas, who's the king of the Spartans, and Xerxes, who's the king of the Persians. And Xerxes thinks that he is God, or rather he tells everybody he's God, and you're about to see why.
Let me guess. You must be Xerxes.
Come, Leonidas. Let us reason together. It would be a regrettable waste. It would be nothing short of madness for you, brave king, and your valiant troops to perish. All because of a simple misunderstanding. There is much our cultures could share.
Haven't you noticed? We've been sharing our culture with you all morning.
Yours is a fascinating tribe. Even now you are defiant. In the face of annihilation and the presence of a god. It isn't wise to stand against me, Leonidas. Imagine what horrible fate awaits my enemies when I would gladly kill any of my own men for victory.
And I would die for any one of mine.
You Greeks take pride in your logic. I suggest you employ it. Consider the beautiful lands you so vigorously defend. Picture it reduced to ash at my whim. Consider the fate of your women.
Clearly, you don't know our women. I might as well have marched them up here, judging by what I've seen. You have many slaves, Xerxes, but few warriors. It won't be long before they fear my spears more than your whips.
It's not the lash they fear. It is my divine power. That I'm a generous god. I can make you rich beyond all measure. I will make you warlord. Greece. You will carry my battle standards to the heart of Europa. Your Athenian rivals will kneel at your feet. If you will but kneel at mine.
You are generous. As you are divine, O King of Kings. Such an offer only a madman would refuse. But the idea of kneeling, it's, you see, slaughtering all those men of yours it's left a nasty crack in my leg, so kneeling will be hard for me.
There will be no glory in your sacrifice. I will erase even the memory of Sparta from the histories. Every piece of Greek parchment shall be burned. Every Greek historian and every scribe shall have their eyes put out and their tongues cut from their mouths. Why, uttering the very name of Sparta or Leonidas will be punishable by death. The world will never know you existed at all.
The world will know that free men stood against a tyrant, that few stood against many. And before this battle was over, that even a god-king can bleed.
Okay, Xerxes is a bad man, and he wants people to believe he's God because he wants power. That's why he says he's God. He knows he isn't, but he says, I'm divine. Did you notice he said, my divine power? He calls himself the King of Kings and the God of gods. But he says he's God, not like David Icke because he's a loony, or like David Koresh because he's a troubled man in mind. He's a bit disturbed as well because you can see from his makeup. But generally he says he's a God because he wants money, sex, and power. He's a scoundrel. He's a villain. He's a bad man, and he uses it to oppress people. So that's three different people we've seen, each of one whom claimed that they were God. But there's another person who claimed that, and they're in a different category altogether. Here's what C.S. Lewis said about the man who's about to appear on the screen. C.S. Lewis said, I'm trying now to prevent people saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is one thing we mustn't say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He'd either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. Do you see what he's saying? He's saying if you say you're the Son of God and you're not, then you are either off your rocker like David Icke, or you're a villain who's trying to oppress people like Xerxes, or you're a bit of both like David Koresh. But if you know that you're not God and you say you are, then you're just a liar trying to get the best, trying to take advantage of people. And if you don't know and you really think you are God and you're not, then you're a loony, aren't you? Like someone who says they're an egg. But here's the thing. For all the evidence we have about Jesus, and we have a lot, he was nothing at all like David Icke. He was nothing at all like David Koresh, and he was nothing at all like Xerxes. So you need to decide who was Jesus. You need to decide whether or not you think this guy was a loony, or whether you think he was a villain, or whether you think he was God. But he can't be anything else, can he? He can't be just a nice man. He's either lying, or he's God, or he's mad. And you need to decide which one of those things he was. And to me, from what I've read of him and what I've studied of him with historical sources, he doesn't look like he was mad at all. He doesn't look like he was a villain. He died a criminal's death without resisting, and he didn't have any money, and he didn't have a girlfriend. So he doesn't look like he was after money or sex or power. He just looked like he was actually killed for telling the truth about who he was. So maybe we have to consider the possibility. Maybe you sitting on your seat, tuning out for a moment, you need to consider the possibility that Jesus was telling the truth about who he was. So I want you to watch this clip that comes up just before we close and see if you think this man was a nutter or a villain or was actually God. We don't have it. Okay, that's fine. So basically, all right, what we would have seen, so I'll tell you the story instead. Jesus is sitting in this clip, he's sitting in a house, and some guys break open the roof and they start lowering down a paralyzed man into the middle of the room. And all the religious people are going, what are you doing? Get him out of here. And Jesus turns around and says, my son, your sins are forgiven. Stop the story there. If somebody came up to you in your local shopping center and said, your sins are forgiven, you'd think they were a loony, wouldn't you? And Jesus says things like that regularly. The religious people say, you can't forgive sins. Only God can do that. And Jesus says, exactly, basically. All right, well, I'll show you then that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins. What's easier, forgiving his sins or telling him to walk? Man, get up off your mat and walk. And the man stands up. And we've got 3 different historical sources from the first century that say this happened. He gets up and starts walking around, and glory to God, glory to God. If you say things like that and do things like that, there's only 3 choices. You're off your rocker and you're deluding everybody, or you're a terrible villain and you're trying to trick everyone, or you're actually God himself. You need to decide which of those 3 he was. You are faced today with the choice, and so is everybody else. I tell you, there was a guy in Eastbourne, where I'm from, who 2 weeks ago had not made this decision. And he was killed in a nightclub in my town 2 weeks ago. He was a bit older than some of you. And he went along, and he had never thought about these questions. He'd never asked them. And he went clubbing one night and just got killed as a result of a brawl. You, any time, any one of you could drop dead. And when you do, please, please don't be like that young man for whom it's now too late to decide who he thinks Jesus was. Don't be like that. You need to decide, how did we get here? But you also need to decide who you think Jesus was. What I want you to do is I want to stand. I'm just going to pray for you, and the band are going to come out and help us praise this Jesus. But I want you to be serious and understanding the weight of what we're talking about. Please don't talk. You did a great job of that earlier.